Hello, everyone. Tony Costa here from Toronto Apologetics. So glad that you could join us for this episode. I'd like to encourage everyone, of course, who comes onto our channel, encourage you to like the channel, to share it, and also to subscribe to the channel. We want to get this information out to as many people as we can, just to build them up in the faith and to edify them and give them the tools that they need. Today, I'm going to be talking about a couple of things, but primarily I'm going to be talking about something in Islam known as the Satanic Verses. And of course, this subject became very famous in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I would say 1990, 1991, when the writer Salman Rushdie wrote a book called The Satanic Verses, and a fatwa was placed on his head by the late Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran. And that fatwa is still on his head. And since that time, he's had to be basically under full-scale security because of the danger on his life. And so we're going to talk about the Satanic Verses today. And this is what prompted me to do this. Was there was a video put out by a Muslim about a year ago. I just came across the video. No one shared it with me. I just came across this video. And what he does is he tries to say that the Satanic Verses story is not true. And then what he goes on to say is that in the Satanic Verses story, what happens is Satan puts his words in the mouth of Muhammad. And this is something that even the Quran alludes to. And what he tries to do is say, well, the same thing happened to the biblical prophets, because in a debate that I did with Nadir Ahmed on Does the Bible Predict the Coming of Muhammad, you could check that out on my channel. In fact, I'll put a link to that debate in the description box. I brought up the fact that no biblical prophet, Satan never put his words into the mouth of any of the biblical prophets. And so to say that what happened to Muhammad also happened to these biblical prophets is absolutely wrong. So I never said that no prophets were tempted by Satan and oppressed and persecuted. In fact, the prophet of all prophets, the Lord Jesus Christ himself, was tempted by Satan for 40 days, 40 nights, according to Matthew chapter 4 and Luke chapter 4. So let me just share the video with you, and then we'll play it, and then I'll make some comments as well as we're going through it and at the end as well. So let's just take a look at this video.
I want to make a quick video. I saw a video where the infamous Nader Ahmed was debating Tony Costa. Tony Costa is one of David Wood's boyfriends.
I have no idea where he got that from. I think he may have a bit of a same-sex obsession there. But no, David Wood is happily married to his wife, as I am happily married to my wife. So not sure where not sure where his mind was going there.
So basically, I just want to respond to the Satanic Verses. Tony Costa says that Satan never influenced prophets in the Bible, and that is 100% false. If we read if we read 1 Chronicles chapter 21 verse 1, it states that Satan provoked or moved David to take the consensus of Israel. So no.
No, in that text, First Chronicles 21 verse 1, Satan, it says, moved David to take a census, not a consensus. A consensus is when there is an agreement among a group of people on a certain issue. The word is census. A census is something that governments take to find out how many people are in a household, etc. And in the Bible as well, Luke 2:1, when Jesus was born, we're told that Caesar Augustus issued forth a census, that the whole world should be enrolled in that census. And so just a correction there. It's not consensus, it's census.
Notice how David, who is considered a prophet according to the New Testament, was provoked or he was influenced by
David was considered a prophet by the Bible, the whole Bible, both the Old and the New Testament.
Satan in 1 Chronicles chapter 21 verse 1. So this claim that prophets can't be influenced by Satan or whatever is false according to the Old Testament or according to the Bible itself. As for the Satanic Verses story is false because even Ibn Ishaq himself says that the Satanic Verses story is false. So Christians cannot use the Satanic Verses story against the Prophet Muhammad because even the earliest reporter of the Satanic Verses says that the Satanic Verses story is false. And I'll pull up the reference right now. Ibn Ishaq says the Satanic Verses story is false. Abu Hayyan al-Andasuri mentions about the story. Imam Muhammad bin Ishaq, aka Ibn Ishaq, the compiler of Sirah is the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, was asked. He said, "This is from the fabrication of the heretics," and he wrote a book on the issue. This is found in Al-Bakh al-Mahir fi Tafsir, Volume 7, page 526. So notice how even Ibn Ishaq himself reported that the Satanic Verses story is false. So Tony Costa is dead wrong on two things. He's dead wrong on prophets not being able to be influenced by Satan. As we've seen in 1 Chronicles, Satan was.
Once again, very quickly, if you watch my debate with Nadir Ahmed, I never said that prophets cannot be tempted or influenced. What I said was prophets never had Satan's words in their mouth. They didn't declare a revelation from God when it was in fact Satan speaking through them. That never, ever happens. Now, temptation, as I already pointed out, the Lord Jesus Christ was tempted, the apostles were tempted, prophets were tempted, but there's a big difference between being tempted by the devil, being moved by the devil, and speaking a word from the devil, thinking that it's the word of God.
Was able to influence David to uh, to do a numbering or a census of Israel. And two, the Satanic Verses story is false according to the earliest biography. According to the earliest biographer of the Prophet Muhammad, Ibn Ishaq. Even Ibn Ishaq himself said that the Satanic Verses story of the Prophet Muhammad is false. So, this refutes Tony Costa's proposition or Tony Costa's argument.
As we're going to see in a minute, Ibn Ishaq is not the only source that talks about the Satanic Verses. There's other sources that talk about this, and we'll be reading from a prominent Muslim scholar who actually did his doctoral dissertation on the validity and on the accuracy of the Satanic Verses story. So we'll be looking at that as well. So let's just listen to the rest of the video.
Against the Prophet Muhammad and the Satanic Verses story, and the fact of the matter is that prophets in the Bible can be influenced by Satan. So stay tuned. More videos coming up ahead.
Okay. Okay, so let's then deal first of all with the source from Sirah al-Rasul. Ibn Ishaq is believed to be the earliest biographer of Muhammad, and Muhammad's biography, came 150 years after his death. So Muhammad dies in 632 AD, and the Sirah, the first biography of Muhammad, comes 150 years, a century and a half after his death. Compare that with the Gospels that only came just a couple of decades. But Muslims don't want to believe the Gospels that were written a couple of decades after the events they purport, but they're certainly okay with a biography that comes 150 years later after Muhammad. And then, of course, the Hadith that come over 200 years after Muhammad. Those they say are reliable. Very, very strange. So what we're going to do, first of all, and remember, when Ibn Ishaq wrote his biography, he wrote the biography Sirah al-Rasul, which basically means the life of the Prophet, the biography of the Prophet. That biography no longer exists. It exists in an edited version by Ibn Hisham, and Ibn Hisham himself admitted that he had to remove parts from the biography of Ibn Ishaq because the stories of Muhammad contained therein were very embarrassing. So now you've got a biographer who's editing the original biography by Ibn Ishaq. He's editing and weeding out those embarrassing stories concerning Muhammad's life, and he openly says that they were embarrassing, that they were inappropriate. So how do you take that a biography is cherry picking to remove the bad stuff about their prophet, but we're going to preserve and conserve the good stuff. So that immediately should cause us concern and suspicion. So let's look at Ibn Ishaq's Sirah al-Rasul, and you can find this. This is readily available on archive.org. I'm going to provide the link to this in the description box, so you can go to it itself and find it. It's very strange that he says that Ibn Ishaq says that this story was false, but he sure spilled a lot of ink telling us about this story. So the references are pages 165 to 167. So we're going to begin here by looking here on the third paragraph here of page 165. So I'm just going to read along and then just make some commentary. Now, this is from, again, the Sirah al-Rasul by Ibn Ishaq. Now, the apostle was anxious for the welfare of his people, wishing to attract them as far as he could. It has been mentioned that he longed for a way to attract them. Now, his people are the Quraysh. These are the Arabs, the pagan Arabs. And the method he adopted is what Ibn Hamid told me that Salama said. Muhammad bin Ishaq told him from Yazid bin Zaid of Medina, from Muhammad bin Ka'b al-Qurazi, when the apostle saw that his people turned their backs on him, and he was pained by their estrangement from what he brought them from God, he longed that there should come to him from God a message that would reconcile his people to him. Because of his love for his people and his anxiety over them, it would delight him if the obstacle that made his task so difficult could be removed, so that he meditated on the project and longed for it, and it was dear to him. Then God sent down, this is from Surah 53 of the Quran, by the star when it sets, your comrade errs not and is not deceived. He speaks not from his own desire. And when he reached his words, this is when he reached the spot in Surah 53, have you thought of Allat and Al-Uzza and Manat? These are three goddesses believed to be the daughters of Allah. The third, the other, notice this, bottom of the page, Satan, when he was meditating upon it and desiring to bring it, that is reconciliation, to his people, what does Satan do? Satan put upon his tongue, top of the paragraph, page 166, Satan put upon his tongue, these are the exalted Quranic, which are, if you look at the footnote to that, the footnote 1 there, the word is said to be Numidian cranes, which fly at a great height. So this word, Qur'anak, is referring to these cranes, these birds that fly to extreme heights in the sky. So these three goddesses, he says, are the exalted cranes whose intercession is approved. Muhammad approves this. The idea that these three goddesses, Allat, Aluz, and Manat, that they are the cranes, the exalted cranes whose intercession is approved. In other words, Allah approves of their intercession. But these are goddesses, which would be polytheism. It would be shirk in Islam. It's associating partners with Allah. When the Quraysh, that's Muhammad's tribe, when the Quraysh heard that, they were delighted and greatly pleased at the way in which he spoke of their gods. And they listened to him, while the believers were holding that what their prophet brought from their Lord was true, not suspecting a mistake or a vain desire or a slip. And when he reached the prostration at the end of the surah, that's Surah 53, in which he prostrated himself, the Muslims prostrated themselves when their prophet prostrated, confirming what he brought and obeying his command. And the polytheists of Quraysh and others who were in the mosque prostrated when they heard the mention of their gods. So that Muhammad prostrated after mentioning these three goddesses, and the Quraysh, when they heard the name of their gods being mentioned, they also prostrated with Muhammad. So here's Muhammad in this biography worshiping with the polytheists and confirming that these goddesses are the exalted cranes that whose intercession is approved, or they should be hoped for. Footnote 2, another reading is that they should be hoped for. Their intercession is to be hoped for. So here's Muhammad basically committing shirk by associating partners with Allah. But remember, shirk is the unforgivable sin in Islam. It's the unpardonable sin. And so Muslims are accusing Christians all the time of Christians associating Jesus with Allah, which is totally false. That's completely false. The Quran doesn't even understand what Christians believe about Jesus as the Son of God. And so what goes on here in this particular case is Muhammad is prostrating with the kafir, the unbelievers, and associating partners with Allah, which according to the Quran is unforgivable. But then again, Muhammad is supposed to be the last prophet. He's supposed to be the example. And so there they prostrate when they heard the mention of their gods, so that everyone in the mosque, believer and unbeliever, prostrated except Al-Walid bin al-Mughira, who was an old man who could not do so. So he took a handful of dirt from the valley and bent over it. Then the people dispersed, and the Quraysh went out, delighted at what had been said about their gods, saying, Muhammad has spoken of our gods in splendid fashion. He alleged in what he read that they are the exalted cranes whose intercession is approved. Now, notice what happens. The news reached the prophet's companions who were in Abyssinia. Abyssinia is Ethiopia. It being reported that the Quraysh had accepted Islam. So some men started to return while others remained behind. Then Gabriel came to the apostle, that's Muhammad, and said, What have you done, Muhammad? You have read to these people something I did not bring you from God. Second paragraph, page 166. You have read to these people something I did not bring you from God, and you have said what he did not say. The apostle was bitterly grieved and was greatly in fear of God. So God sent down a revelation, for he was merciful to him, comforting him and making light of the affair, and telling him that every prophet and apostle before him desired as he desired and wanted what he wanted, and Satan interjected something into his desires as he had on his tongue. Notice that Satan put these words on his tongue. So God annulled what Satan had suggested, and God established his verses. That is, you are just like the prophets and apostles. In other words, what is being said here is that, don't worry, Muhammad, what happened to you? This is what happened to other prophets and apostles. So Allah annuls what Satan suggested. So this is the doctrine of abrogation, that Allah abrogates what Satan has spoken. So there's abrogation that has gone on in the Quran. Here's the problem, folks. If Satan spoke to or through Muhammad at this juncture, at this point, when he was reciting Surah 53, if Satan confused him at this point, how do we know that he didn't confuse him at other points as well? And so it goes on to say here that God basically told them that don't worry about it. This is what others have done. And so it goes on to say, then God sent down, we have not sent a prophet or apostle before you, but when he longed, Satan cast suggestions into his longing, but God will annul what Satan has suggested. Then God will establish his verses, God being knowing and wise. Thus God relieved his prophet's grief and made him feel safe from his fears and annulled what Satan had suggested in the words used above. So there it is, that Satan put those words in his mouth about their gods by his revelation. Are yours the males and his the females? That were indeed an unfair division, most unjust. They are nothing but names which your fathers gave them as far as the words to whom he pleases and accepts. That is, how can the intercession of their gods avail with them? So basically, those words that Muhammad had spoken about their gods, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, what ends up happening is that God basically replaces those words. He annuls, abolishes, or abrogates those words that Satan suggested. And in the place of those words, he now replaced it with the words, are yours the males and his the females? That were indeed an unfair division. They are nothing but names which your fathers gave them. So we're going to look at that passage, and we're going to discuss that passage and see how those verses were introduced. So that is Ibn Ishaq. You could check that for yourself. Again, the link to this will be available in the description box, and you could check it for yourself. Now, while we're on the Satanic Verses, I want to discuss further about the Satanic Verses. And then what I'd like to do is I would like to come back to the passage that was brought up about David in the Old Testament. So let's just finish this part on the Satanic Verses, and then we will address the question of the census in First Chronicles 21. So here in the Qur'an, it states in Surah 22, verse 52, "Never sent we a messenger or a prophet before thee," that is Muhammad, before Muhammad, "but when he recited the message, Satan proposed opposition in respect of that which he recited thereof. But Allah abolisheth that which Satan proposeth. When Allah establisheth his revelations, Allah is knower, wise." So this passage in the Quran, Surah 22, verse 52, has generally been taken by scholars to be a reference to the Satanic Verses. This is a surah with this verse that was revealed to explain what happened to Muhammad, as recounted in Ibn Ishaq's biography. And so basically what this is saying is what we saw in the biography, that messengers before Muhammad, the same thing happened to them. That when they recited a message, Satan proposed something different in opposition. But then Allah abolishes what Satan proposes. And so the Quran here is this is damage control. The Quran is trying to excuse Muhammad for making this blunder, and it is trying to justify his behavior by saying, don't worry about it. This has happened before to other prophets. So don't be overly concerned about that. Now, the way that surah today stands in Surah 53, verses 19 to 23, it says, "Have you thought upon Allat and Al-Uzza and Manat, the third, the other?" And so once again, Allat and Al-Uzza and Manat are three goddesses that were worshipped by the pagan Arabs and worshipped by the Quraysh. That's the Arabic tribe that Muhammad came from. So these three goddesses, remember when he was first reciting this, he said, "Have you considered them? They are the exalted cranes, and their intercession is to be hoped for." But then that verse, the Satanic Verses, that's why they're called Satanic Verses, those verses, if you notice, they're no longer in Surah 53. Those verses were abolished, and they were replaced by the following words, which we saw in Ibn Ishaq's biography. "Are yours the males and his the females?" In other words, does Allah just get female daughters and you get the males, as if to say males are superior? That's what the Arabs believed. In fact, the Quran teaches that as well, that men are superior to women, but that's a topic for another day. But the idea here is that this is supposed to be the replacement of the Satanic Verses. Are yours the males and his the females? That indeed were an unfair division. They, that is Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, they are but names which you have named, ye and your fathers, for which Allah hath revealed no warrant. In other words, these goddesses, you guys invented them, your fathers invented them, and Allah did not reveal this. And so this is the crucial verse. This is the crucial passage in the Quran that speaks about the section where the Satanic Verses were recited at one time, and then they were replaced by the remainder of these words you see here at the end, beginning with, "Are yours the males and his the females?" Now, one of the most prominent scholars who studied the Satanic Verses was Professor Shahab Ahmed. And unfortunately, Professor Ahmed passed away in 2015. But he wrote a doctoral dissertation, which was passed on this subject, and then he published some works. So Professor Ahmed, in his book, The Satanic Verses Incident in the Memory of the Early Islamic Community, says this: "The Satanic Verses incident constituted a standard element in the historical memory of the Muslim community in the first 150 years of Islam and was recorded by almost all prominent scholars working in the fields of tafsir and sirah magazi. And so it's important to realize that for the first 150 years of Islam's history, so this would take you into about 787 in the 780s AD, 782, 150 years after Muhammad's death in 632. This was the standard element in the historical memory of the Muslim community. And it was recorded, that is, the story was recorded by all prominent scholars. Then he goes on to point this out. We have repeatedly dated the reports of the Satanic Verses incident to the late 1st and early 2nd centuries, that is, after Muhammad's death. In other words, to what seems to have been the earliest period of systematic collection and organization of historical memory materials in the Muslim community. As regards the discourses of which these reports formed a part, we have found that all the reports were transmitted by late 1st, early 2nd century Sirah, Magazi, and Tafsir scholars. That is to say, Tafsir scholars are the commentators. Now, Professor Ahmed wrote this book, Before Orthodoxy, the Satanic Verses and Early Islam. If you can purchase a copy of that book for your own research purposes, I would highly recommend it. And so he goes into great detail in this book about the Satanic Verses in early Islam and how it was accepted as a bona fide account of what actually happened with Muhammad. Now, Professor Ahmed goes on to point this. Ibn Taymiyyah, against the majoritarian opinion of the scholars of his day, accepted the historicity of the Satanic Verses as something wholly consonant with Muhammad's status and mission as the messenger of God. He asserted that belief in the incident was the position of the early Muslims, the Salaf, and thus the original and authentic truth. So Ibn Taymiyyah, a very respected scholar in Islam, he accepted the historicity of that story. He said it was completely compatible. It was completely consonant with Muhammad's status and mission as a messenger. And he also points out that this was the belief of the early Muslims, at least for 150 years. And the question is, what happened? Why was it the view of the early Muslims? Why was it changed later? Well, I think the reason why the story was later challenged and then later discarded, as most Muslims do today, as you heard this Muslim fellow, I don't know his name, I just have the name of his YouTube channel. Most Muslims today will say, most of them will say, well, no, that never happened. That's false. And there's a reason why they did that, because this is an extremely embarrassing story. And if you apply the principle of embarrassment, which is a principle that historians use in studying historical documents, what you will find here is that many Muslims came to become very embarrassed by this, and they simply rejected it and began to dismiss it. He goes on to say, Professor Ahmed, the Satanic Verses were being transmitted in almost every important intellectual center in the Dar al-Islam, that is, in the Islamic Empire, the domain of Islam. It was being transmitted in Medina, in Mecca, in Basra, in Kufa, in Baghdad, in Masisa, in Rai, in Balkh, Samarkand, in Sana, Fustat, and Kairaman. Now, notice that it was widespread, not just in one location, it was widespread in the Islamic Empire. Professor Ahmed goes on to say the Satanic Verses incident is narrated in numerous reports between 18 and 25, depending on how one reckons, an independent Rawiya, scattered in the Sirah Nabawiyah, that is the Sirah of the Prophet, and Tafsir literature, the commentators, originating in the first 2 centuries of Islam. The indications are that the incident formed a fairly standard element in the historical memory of the early Muslim community regarding the life of its founder. Now, that, of course, was not even addressed by our friend. He hasn't done his homework. Professor Ahmed goes on to say, among the doctrines that emerged from the mid-second, that is 8th century, that is after 8th century AD, the mid-second century, um, onwards was that of Ismat al-Anibia, literally the protection of the prophets, meaning God's protection of them from sin and error. So the mid-second century, this would be referring to after the Hijra. So remember, in Islam, the Hijra is the migration when Muhammad went from Mecca to Medina, which that took place in 622 AD. And so Muslims mark their calendars after the Hijra. How many years after the Hijra? That is after 622. 622 AD is the beginning of the Islamic calendar. So Muslims count everything from that date. The 8th century is referring to, of course, the Christian calendar. So that would be the 700s. So once again, among the doctrines that emerged from the mid-second after the Hijra, 8th century AD onwards, was that of Ismat al-Anabiyya. What does that mean? Ismat Anabiyya means the protection of the prophets. This idea evolved within Islam, and this was not originally there. And this doctrine basically says that God protects the prophets from sin and error. And so one of the common beliefs of Islam today is that the prophets were sinless. That, of course, is not what the Bible teaches. And of course, the Quran doesn't even teach that. The Quran teaches Muhammad, in fact, did sin. There's only one prophet in the Quran that never, ever sinned, who was perfect, who was blameless, and that was Jesus. Even the Quran admits he was sinless, whereas all the other prophets were sinful. They were sinners. So the idea, the evolution of this idea of Ismat al-Anabiyya, the protection of the prophets, this is something that arose in Shia Islam as well, where the prophets are impeccable, they can't sin, and it's also held by the Sunnis as well. So with the emergence of this idea that prophets are supposed to be impeccable, now you can see why the current changed. The tide began to change from, yes, indeed, Muhammad did this. Yes, Muhammad did fumble here. But now, by adopting this idea that the prophets are sinless, what do? Well, now we can say that the story isn't true, because since God protects prophets from sin and error, the Satanic Verses story cannot be true. But they only came to this conclusion afterwards, right? It was an after effect where they responded to at least 2 centuries of believing in this story. So when we look at the Hadith, and so this is now the traditions, the deeds and sayings of Muhammad. Sahih al-Bukhari, number 1071, narrated Ibn Abbas, the prophet prostrated while reciting An-Najm, that is the name of Surah 53, and with him prostrated the Muslims, the pagans, the jinns, and all human beings. So notice here, this is very important. Notice here that Bukhari is very reserved here. He doesn't go into great detail, as we saw with Ibn Ishaq. And this is a sound hadith, that it was narrated that the prophet, that is Muhammad, he prostrated while he was reciting Surah 53, and with him prostrated, notice who prostrated, the Muslims, the pagans, the jinns, these are these spiritual beings, and all human beings. Notice he's very reserved. Now, if you read this, you're going to ask yourself, well, why did the pagans prostrate with them? For what reason? Since the pagans rejected him and he rejected them, why would the pagans be prostrating with Muhammad alongside of the jinn and all the other human beings and all human beings? Why would they do this? And so here the hadith is very reserved, but something is amiss here. What are pagans doing prostrating with Muhammad? Well, once again, the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq explains that for us. Which leads us to this question, folks. What does the Bible say about people who claim to be prophets? Deuteronomy 13, 1-3, and verse 5. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them. Now, what did Muhammad do in the Satanic Verses incident? He invoked the 3 goddesses. other gods, to the point that the Qur'an said he spoke well of our prophets. Excuse me, he spoke well of our gods. He spoke well of our gods. But Deuteronomy says that if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams comes and he says to you, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them. That sounds like what Muhammad was saying when he was praying with the Quraysh, with the pagans. It says, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of slavery, to make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So these false prophets will make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk, so you shall purge the evil from your midst. And so here you will notice that a false prophet will do what? He will lead you to go after other gods to serve them. Is that what Muhammad did? According to the Sirah, yes, that's exactly what he did. But notice also in Deuteronomy 18:20, but the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. So according to Deuteronomy 18, verse 20, Muhammad would be one who presumes to speak a word in the name of God and is one who speaks in the name of other gods. Did Muhammad speak in the name of other gods? Yes. He spoke in the name of Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. Notice here in the Quran, Surah 17, verses 73 to 75. What is this surah talking about? Who's it referring to? They sought to entice you from our revelations. Who are they? These would be the pagan Arabs. They sought to entice you from our revelations. They nearly did, hoping that you might invent some other scripture in our name and thus become their trusted friend. Indeed, had we not strengthened your faith, you might have made some compromise with them and thus incurred a double punishment in this life and in the next. Then you should have found none to help you against us. Very interesting passage in the Quran. Very interesting. That some people are trying to entice Muhammad from the revelations that he was receiving from Allah. And he basically says here that they almost did. They nearly succeeded, hoping that Muhammad might invent some other scripture and become their trusted friend. That sounds a lot like what we read in the biography of Muhammad. And then it goes on to say that it was Allah who strengthened him, and you might have made some compromise with them. Well, according to the biography, Muhammad did make compromise with them. He did compromise by prostrating and naming their gods. And Allah warns them that you would have incurred a double punishment in this life and in the next, and you would have no help. You should have found none to help you against us. Very, very strong words here. So what is this passage referring to? It seems to be referring to that incident in the life of Muhammad. Even the famous Sir William Muir wrote this in his book, The Life of Muhammad. Pious Muslims of after days, that is, Muslims who came later, that is, after 200 years of Islam, pious Muslims of after days, scandalized at the lapse of their prophet into so flagrant a concession to idolatry, would reject the whole story. But the authorities are too strong to be impugned. It is hardly possible to conceive how the tale, if not founded in truth, could ever have been invented. Close quote. And so notice how Sir William Muir openly admits that later Muslims were scandalized by the story of the Satanic Verses. They were scandalized that their prophet would lapse and that he would make this flagrant concession to idolatry. So what did they do? They decided to reject the whole story. That's what our friend did in the video. He rejected the whole story. He's siding with later Muslims. And we're not saying that later Muslims didn't come along and write and say the whole thing was made up. What we're saying is that the earliest Muslims believed this story for about 2 centuries. But notice how Sir William Muir says the authorities upon which that story is based are too strong to just impugn them and throw them out. And he's right. It's hardly possible to conceive how the tale, if not founded in truth, could ever have been invented. Why would somebody invent such an embarrassing story to start with? Why didn't Ibn Ishaq keep it out of his biography? Why did he write it? And so, if it was not true, why would they invent such a story? It is an incredibly embarrassing story. And yet it only appears we get it from the Islamic sources. It's not the enemies of Islam that are writing about this. These come from the Islamic sources themselves. And why would Muslims create such a story about Muhammad if it were not true? Well, the fact that they're reacting to it, the later Muslims reacted to it and wanted to get rid of it, demonstrates how embarrassing the story was. But as we saw from Professor Ahmed, the research shows that this was believed by all the early Islamic communities, and it was spread throughout the Islamic Empire. Now, I did say that we would also come back to talking about the passage that our friend brought up from 1 Chronicles 21, 1 to 3 there. And there it states, then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the army, go, number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring me a report that I may know their number. But Joab said, may the Lord add to his people 100 times as many as they are. Are they not my lord, the king, all of them my lord's servants? Why then should my lord require this? Why should it be a cause of guilt for Israel? Now, notice what's happening here. In order to understand the background to this, you got to read, you have to read 1 Samuel 23 and 22 and other passages, which basically indicates that David had been compromising his walk with the Lord, and this would have brought the Lord's displeasure upon him. And notice how Joab responds here. One of the things that the king was not supposed to do, according to Deuteronomy 17, the king was not to multiply armies. He was not to multiply soldiers, because to multiply soldiers or to take a census of the soldiers is to show disregard for God's sovereignty. It's to show disregard for the fact that God is the protector of Israel. And so notice Joab says that may the Lord add to his people 100 times, and as they are, and are they not my Lord the king, all of them my Lord's servants? Why would my Lord require this? This would be a cause of guilt for Israel. Now, the question is, did Satan put words in David's mouth? No. It says that Satan incited David to number Israel, but here's the problem. And this is something that our friend did not consider. In the Old Testament, we do not have a complete picture or a full description of Satan, the devil. The word Satan in Hebrew is the word Shatan, or Satan, and the word Satan means an adversary. That word is used of people. It's used of the angel of Yahweh in the book of Numbers when he confronts Balaam on his donkey. It says that the angel of the Lord came against him. He came against him as a Satan, as a Satan, as an adversary. And so the question is, the word Satan here is being used as a proper name. This is the only time in the Old Testament where the name Satan is used that way. It's usually preceded with what we call the definite article, ha-Satan, the Satan, the adversary. And that word Satan could refer to a foreign enemy, an adversary who stood against Israel. And some commentators believe that this Satan, this adversary, could have been a foreign power, could have been a foreign king that wanted to attack Israel. And so David is concerned about this. And what does he do is he wants to number Israel to make sure that he has enough troops on the ground to withstand a possible attack. So that is one view, that the word Satan there can refer to a foreign enemy. Now, could it refer to the the entity that we know as the devil? Well, it can, but we need to let context determine that. Now, what our friend did not point out is that First Chronicles 21 is also repeated in Second Samuel as a parallel account. So when we look at First Chronicles, excuse me, that was supposed to be First Chronicles 21, 1 to 3. That's a typo there, by the way, folks. I'll make sure that I get that fixed. And so that's supposed to be First Chronicles 21, verses 1 to 3. Then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. But notice the parallel account in 2 Samuel 24, 1 to 3. Again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, "Go number Israel and Judah." And so you have pretty much the same parallel that you saw there with Job in verse 3, pointing out to the king, may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times, as many as they are, while the eyes of my Lord the king still see it. But why does my Lord the king delight in this thing? So remember, folks, on the left side, that's a typo. It's supposed to be First Chronicles 21, verses 1 to 3. Notice the parallel here. Notice that in 2 Samuel, it's the anger of the Lord that was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them. And in First Chronicles 21, 1, it says Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. So who incited David to number Israel? Was it the Lord or was it Satan? Is it A or B, or is it A and B? Is it possible that Satan is being used as a secondary means to accomplish God's purpose in bringing judgment upon David? Absolutely. So the God of the Bible is absolutely sovereign. He is so sovereign that God uses people as secondary means to accomplish his purposes. God not only uses people as means, he could use the devil, as he does in the book of Job, or Satan there. And there's scholarly debate about whether the Satan in the book of Job is Satan the devil. That's a video for another day. But the point being here is that Satan cannot act without God's permission. And so unless our friend wants to say that the Lord is Satan, which would be blasphemous both to Jews and Christians and Muslims, to claim that Allah is Iblis, that he's the devil, I don't think he will. I don't think our friend did his homework, and I don't think our friend was familiar with the fact that First Chronicles 21 is parallel in 2 Samuel 24. And so the question has to do with who exactly is the Satan mentioned in First Chronicles 21. There's a number of views on this, and they're all legitimate. It could be a foreign adversary, which is what the word Satan means in Hebrew. It means an adversary. It could be a reference to a heavenly being who we know as the devil. Some have even proposed, like Michael Heiser, have proposed that the adversary here is actually God acting as an adversary against Israel and bringing judgment upon David. And so that's using the word Satan in Hebrew to refer to an adversary. That is to say, when someone acts as an adversary, they're acting as a Satan, because that's what it means. But it certainly does not mean what our friend thinks it means, that this is referring to Satan putting words into David's mouth. That's not what we see. First Chronicles 21 does not say that Satan put words in his mouth, but it does say in 2 Samuel 24 that it was the Lord. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them. And so at the end of the day, these passages are not contradictory. They're actually compatible with each other. They're complementarian in that they complete one another. And so the anger of the Lord was kindled, and God either acted as an adversary against David, or God worked through an adversary, a foreign power, or God worked through the evil one by using him to bring judgment. So it could be one of those three views, but in either case, in none of these cases are we told that David spoke the words of Satan. That's how desperate our Muslim friends have to get to try to show that their prophet really, really goofed up on this area. And so I hope that this episode, it was a little long, but it had to be said, it had to be addressed. And again, this just goes to show that our Muslim friends are willing to revise history, their own history. They're willing to revise their own history to protect this embarrassing idea that Muhammad fumbled and he was moved and had words placed into his mouth from Satan that was never spoken by Allah. So I trust that you enjoyed this video. I trust you enjoyed the explanation between 1 Chronicles 21 and 2 Samuel 24. We encourage you to like the video, share the video, and also to subscribe. If you have not subscribed to Toronto Apologetics, you are always welcome to do so. Share it with others, and we want to get this type of information out there as much as we can. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next time. Until then, God bless. Bye for now.